Toda Mayor, and toda everybody for being around. This will be the second of two sessions, and some of the pictures we'll see are actually real and were taken then, and some aren't. If I see, I'll try to let you know, but about half and half. So I'm continuing now with part 3, which is when we're leaving the village of Rabbi Taratin. Chapter 3, change of town, change of prayer. Late that night, we got our gear ready, received the green light, and tiptoed out of the house. At first, it was a little scary going outside again, but once we were out, we all felt safer. We walked out of the neighborhood, up a hill, through a tobacco field, and we were gone, out of the village. Whew. We walked for hours, and we were very happy. And that's a real picture. Just before dawn, a loud boom was heard from the village across from us where Dalit Company was located. I shuddered because it wasn't a good boom, if there is such a thing. It was too close for comfort, and I had a friend who was an officer in Dalit Company and wondered if he was there on the spot, and indeed, all hell broke loose on the radio, and it was my friend's voice that I heard. He was not calm, and he was always calm. And he was telling the battalion commander that 6 of his men were just hit by a missile or a shell or something, and that all firing in the area must stop, just in case it was friendly fire. 6 of my men have been hit, and 1 is in critical condition. Get a helicopter here quick, and I mean quick, or he isn't gonna make it. I looked at my watch, it was 6:37 a.m. We stopped, but it turns out we couldn't go and help them. It was too dangerous to enter the other town from our direction. The officer radioed again and again, pleading for a helicopter, and after a while, he stopped begging. It was then that we understood that the soldier didn't make it. After what felt like an eternity, the jet flew by and dropped diversionary flares, and then 2 helicopters came in for the wounded. I looked at my watch, 7:35 a.m., an hour. People cursed under their breaths, but again, we all knew that the pilots had a lot of work to do, and it wasn't from fear or laziness that they didn't arrive sooner. Still, it was very frustrating and very sad. Worse, it turns out that this all happened because of a strange coincidence of mixed fire, both from terrorists with small arms fire and from friendly fire. The shell came from one of our own tanks. For whatever reason, we had killed ourselves. At that point, I felt a need to change my prayer. I couldn't keep asking for our bullets to hit their mark. I needed more than that. I didn't know what to pray for at the time. We kept marching on. This time, we were in a riverbed. And suddenly, we heard a pop, and boom, whoosh, and whiz. And it was a missile. Somebody fired a missile at us, and we ducked as if that would help any. And we all looked up, and we could all clearly see, although this wasn't taken real time, there wasn't enough time, and nobody was walking around with a camera, but we could see an anti-tank missile sailing just a few feet above our heads. It was going pretty slowly, and I could see the colors as it twirled past us. It kept on going and going, and then it exploded with a tremendous thud in the distance, and I felt like a sitting duck, but continuing onwards was not necessarily the best choice. So we stopped, and the radio folks tried to assess from other forces who exactly shot that missile, and perhaps this was another instance of friendly fire, but no, it wasn't ours. And after a few minutes, we continued walking, and after that, another whoosh, same thing, same missile, same direction, same right over our heads. We were walking in a deep riverbed, and somebody knew that we were there and was trying to hit us. Without thinking, I started muttering out loud, "Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me." Good old 23rd Psalm. It fit perfectly. This was a valley of the shadow of death. And this would be my new prayer. Just be with us. That's what we need. Just be with us. Today it seems strange to me, but at the time deciding what prayer to say had as much meaning and importance as where to take cover when you're shot at. Of course, there's the famous saying, there are no atheists in foxholes. But I would prefer to say, war is a powerful school for prayer. We'd been walking and stopping, on and off for hours. The sun was about to set. The missiles kept coming, and we had many reasons to be gloomy. And then I saw right there in the last light, still shining from the sky, something that lit up the scenery, something that only I saw, something that only Livnot people could really understand. And of course, it was a caper bush. Now, there are caper bushes and there are caper bushes. Until now, all the caper bushes that I found were like the one you see here, semi-dead. That's what happens in the summer. The leaves are eaten by moths. There's no real color. There's just the last fruit. It's very dull looking. And that's the way it should be. But this caper bush was different. This one was alive, like that color. It was bright, bright green, and it didn't fit the summer. And it was almost shining, not unlike the tree that's plugged into an electric socket in Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, for those who have read it. And even though I usually try to disregard signs, I simply couldn't ignore this. It was so symbolic, and it radiated one clear, simple message: the Jewish people are eternal. No matter what happens, the greater Jewish people will still go on. I couldn't explain my feelings to anybody at the time. We were in motion, and even if we had stopped, I just couldn't see myself trying to explain to others the importance of a caper bush in the Jewish tradition. But I was amazed to see how my own spirits picked up instantly, and we kept marching towards our next village, Taibe. Soon it was dark, and we allowed ourselves to leave the riverbed and march on the land above it. And this is a map of where Taibe is. You can see that if you go to Metula at the very edge of Israel, and you take a sharp left to the west, you get to Taibe. The entire battalion, hundreds of people, were moving quickly and silently to Taibe. When there was barbed wire to be crossed, each soldier made a sign to the soldier behind. Sometimes there were shells or suspicious objects on the ground, and hand signs would be passed back, and you had to figure out what the guy in front was trying to tell you. Everything had a signal, like be extra quiet, or crouch, or we're taking a long break, or take a sip of water, or this is a dangerous area, or be ready for anything, or those are also our soldiers on the right, etc. As we passed the school, a strange sign was made. People were jumping over something, and when I got to the spot right in front of the school, I jumped over a strange object, and when I was in midair, even in the dead of night, I realized this was a person. We were jumping over a dead person. He was a terrorist. He was dead and totally burnt and tangled in electrical wiring, and an electric pole was down near him, and it was a terrible, terrible sight. Even though it was pitch dark out, what kind of sign do you make for the person behind you? How can you prepare for someone for seeing such a terrible thing? And if this isn't one in front of a school in the edge of a cliff facing a huge part of southern Lebanon, we would have moved or covered or buried the body and given it some respect. But it was dangerous to be there even for a few moments, and it was really a terrible situation. As we entered our new hometown of Taibe and were greeted with this grisly welcome, the whole thing became symbolic in my eyes, and yet again, as I mentioned last week, I was mad at Hezbollah and cursed them, saying, why do you hate so intensely? Why do you hate so much that you start wars? Why do you take over schools and hide behind innocent civilians and try to get us to hit them while trying to hit you? You cause your own people to be burnt and left in the streets. And you don't care about your country, your people, and the civilians. You just want to live quiet lives here. Don't you care about the sanctity of human life? And I prayed for the day, paraphrasing Golda Meir, when their love for their own countrymen would outweigh their hate for their Jewish neighbors. Chapter 4, Heaven and Hell. After a few minutes, we arrived at the peak of a hill in Taibe, and a number of soldiers exclaimed, hey, there's the old IDF base. They had served there in the 1980s and 90s. They knew exactly where they were, and I was still getting my bearings. The old base at the time wasn't really a base anymore, but it was a protected area, and I saw a number of IDF vehicles there, and a convoy had made it through. And then a few supplies came out, mainly food, medicine, and especially water, which was so missing. People were so happy, and it helped almost erase the previous experiences in the riverbed with the missiles and with the dead person near the school. After a while every platoon was laden down with water and supplies, we happily hobbled, because of the schlepping, the few hundred meters to our new house. There were good and bad things about this house. It was on the edge of the city and therefore open to missile fire from much of southern Lebanon. On the other hand, it was a regular house that did not stick out from the rest of the neighborhood. At the entrance to the house, on a big white outside wall, was written the number 13, which could only mean one thing. The famous 13th Battalion of the Golani Brigade. These are infantrymen from the standing army of 18 to 20-year-olds, and they must have been here before us. Then I realized that they wrote the number 13 with bullet holes. Those idiots, those young fools. I was very upset at the time. Our army does not do that. We are taught and trained never to put our finger near the trigger unless there's a life in danger. But it happened. There are advantages and disadvantages about being a young soldier. They're in much better physical and military shape than reserve soldiers with our beer bellies and sore backs. But this is one of the disadvantages, but it was the only time I saw wanton destruction in Lebanon by the IDF. Anyway, we got inside, split into rooms, set up a rotation of guards and sleepers, and got as many people to sleep as possible because everybody was exhausted. And Ziv and I took the first shift using our little night scope all the time to scan our new surroundings. There was a lot of shooting going on all over the area, but nothing in our immediate neighborhood. And we munched a lot that shift since we had so many goodies from the convoy, mainly Bamba. Yes, Bamba. The shift zipped on by, and soon we were waking up the next shift in whispers. There were booms and bangs in the distance, but we fell like logs into blissful sleep. The next morning, we woke up early with everybody else, and it was time to survey the premises of our new home. This house had many advantages compared to our previous one in Rabbi Taratim. First of all, it was bigger. It had more rooms. The rooms were spacier. And most important for us, there were mattresses. This is a picture of one of the mattresses. To sleep on a mattress was an extreme luxury that seemed far too extravagant for this war. Upstairs was an unfinished floor with walls and no windows. In one room was a huge pile of sand. We decided this would be perfect for the bathroom area, especially with the American-made disposable toilet bags that had just arrived in the IDF supply convoy. This way, we would stay healthy ourselves and keep the place relatively clean for the residents when they came back after the war. Since now we knew where to look, we found coffee and tea and even some rice. Food-wise, we now had salami sticks and bamba from the army. We couldn't complain. Anyone who has bamba in their hands cannot complain. In another hour, the first mission of hunting for missile launchers and searching for terrorists would go out. Ziv and I were not in this group. Instead, we did guard duty and then attempted to make dinner. Ziv is great at this, as well as his fellow chef Amir, and I kind of was their helper. We made rice and we put pieces of salami sticks inside, and we added a lot of sugar, which we found in the pantry. It was pretty good. You should try it sometime. Night fell and it was time for dinner, and we were serving everybody. Everybody was starving and no flashlights were allowed. Everything happened in pitch darkness. Someone found a stick light and shaded it in a way that it made the very least light that you could imagine, and we ate, barely seeing what we put into our mouths, and nobody complained. That's what it looked like pretty much. It tasted like the most elegant of foods. We finished, cleaned up, and started the night shift. Just as we were getting settled in, just like before, it started. Missiles began to fly right next to us, exploding nearby as if all hell had broke loose. The short normalcy of relative quietude had ended. Terror and fear came in to visit us again. People cursed and it was depressing. Just because we had better conditions doesn't mean we were safer, but that's the way the human mind works. More missiles were shot and they zoomed very close to our house. We could hear screaming from the outside, and that was the worst. Who was that screaming? Was that us or was that them? Nobody knew what the hell was going on. And that is the very essence of war. And then another missile whizzed by and boom, scored a direct hit on something very close to us. And the whole house shuddered. It wasn't our house, but apparently something very close. More screaming. The radio man came around to the different rooms and gave a report. A tank standing a few houses away got a direct hit from a Hezbollah missile. The doctor in our platoon had been called upon to get them immediately with a group of soldiers, so Ziv and I volunteered. And this was going to be messy. I've never dealt with a hit tank before. Just as we were getting our gear on, we got a message. not to go. Another doctor with another group of soldiers that was near already got to the tank. Unfortunately, the commander and some of the soldiers were already dead. Shooting was going on all over the place. In the pitch darkness, someone came running into our room and fell down on the floor and yelled at the top of his voice, "I'm Ami, the assistant to the chief of staff of the IDF." What was going on? We don't have any soldier named Ami. And why would the assistant to the chief of staff of the IDF be, of all places, in our room? It took us a while to figure out what was happening. One of our soldiers simply lost it. It could happen to anybody. After we understood this, we helped him back to his room, gave him something to drink, helped him lie down on his mattress, and reported the incidents to the commanding officer and the doctor. What a crazy night that was. It was full of terrible surprises, like the falling down of the curtain behind me. That, coupled with guard duty, didn't leave us much time to sleep, and Ziv and I knew that the next day it would be our turn to go out on a search mission. I shuddered to think what kind of a person I would be when I woke up the next morning with so little sleep and so many sad thoughts, and yet I still fell asleep. This is also a real picture from there. I fell asleep with a strange realization that I'll try to describe to you. In normal civilian life, one has a good normal day and goes to sleep at night, and sometimes fears and apprehensions creep into the subconscious, and at night, one might have nightmares or scary thoughts and dreams. But not to worry, the next morning, as soon as you open your eyes, the terror is gone, the scary part's gone, one gets out of bed and jumps into the next normal day. But in war, it's the opposite. One lives a day of hell. A number of times you literally feel fear for your life, and the number of times you see impossible, terrible situations. There's incredible pressure to be good, to be on your toes, not to mess up, to keep discipline, to act ethically, to initiate, to help others, to keep the body in good shape and stay alive, and to stay sane. You're bound to fail in some little detail of all that you have to do. There are traumatic experiences that pepper your day. You miss home, you fear for your life. It's a living nightmare. And then at night, when you have some time to sleep, it's potential bliss. You close your eyes and you drift off into a world of peace, of normalcy, of soothing regularity and familiarity. It's the exact opposite of what days and nights are supposed to be. And so it seemed to me was the very moment of waking up. In regular life, this is the highlight of my day. I'm a morning person. But in war, it's the most depressing. You open your eyes from your fantasy world of normalcy and you realize, damn, I'm still in hell. For a moment, I thought it was over, but it isn't. Therefore, hard to explain, but one of the true highlights of my entire experience during these 10 days in Lebanon happened the next morning when I opened my eyes. I was awoken the next morning by a soldier in our unit, Danny, with a soft voice and a hot, steaming cup of Turkish coffee that smelled like heaven. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see war or guns or uniforms. I saw a smiling face of a young man who brought me a cup of coffee. This seemingly insignificant act brought a little piece of heaven into my hell, and I seriously doubt that I can really explain how such a trivial act could be so meaningful. It was then that I understood something. I truly internalized how important it was to do little good deeds for other people in war. In fact, it was as important in my eyes as anything military. It was military. I knew this in my brain until now, but now I knew it in my gut. And from that moment on, I was transformed. I spent all of my downtime in the kitchen with Ziv and Amir, cooking, cleaning, and most often bringing coffee and tea to all the other soldiers. We pretended we were waiters. We put towels over our arms. We walked ridiculously around the house, often imitating the gait of a waitress, yes, and quenching everybody's unquenchable summer thirst while trying to be clownish. All this in silence, of course, and at night in total darkness. Amir and I would quote lines from Catch-22 to each other. We pledged together years ago to read this book once a year to stay sane while in the army and be able to laugh at ourselves. Yossarian is always there when you need it. That day, before it was our turn to go out missile hunting, I decided to write a letter to the residents of our house. I looked in one of the rooms and I found the architect's plan of the house. I figured it would be best to write to them on this heavier paper since it wasn't something light that could fly away in the wind. Also, the architect certainly had copies. From this plan, I learned the name of the residents, and found the name and email address of the architectural firm in Beirut that planned the house. I thought that in the future, perhaps they would be helpful and contacted the family should that ever happen. And this is what I wrote. Thursday, August 10, 2006. Salam alaikum wa rahmat Allah. I assume that I'm writing to the owner of this house, and here I wrote the name as was written on the architect's plan. On behalf of my unit, I want to thank you for the use of your house. If we caused damage by staying here, please know it was not done wantonly in order to cause damage, but rather in order to stay alive and survive this terrible war. Nobody in my unit, the reserve paratroop unit in the IDF, enjoys war. We all just want to get back alive to our regular existence with our families, our wives, our children, our houses, our jobs, and our loved ones. However, when death is rained down from the skies of Lebanon in the form of Katyusha rockets and murder innocent people in Israel, people who did nothing to warrant such attacks, we must defend them. We must prevent murder. You have a very nice house and you have a very nice countryside. Why can't we all use these for good things? The Middle East could be such a great home for us all if we would just say goodbye to violence and hello to understanding, mutual respect, and love of all mankind. I don't know if you support Hezbollah, and the truth is I don't care about that right now. What's important for me is that you know that we have nothing against you personally as Lebanese. We didn't come in hate. We came to defend innocent people that are being murdered daily and have done nothing wrong and are guilty of no crime. We came to prevent murder and not to destroy in order to destroy. And I want you to understand that. I'm sure the process of rebuilding your lives and your house and your village and your country will be very long and very expensive and very painful. Perhaps you can find some small amount of comfort in the hope that in the wake of this war, with death on both sides, we can all begin to build a better world, a better Middle East, a better home. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren, don't we? They deserve better than this. May Allah have mercy on us all. I send you the blessings of a neighbor, Michael, a simple father and husband and lover of all humans. P.S. If you'd like to correspond, I'd be happy to be in touch afterwards, if I'm still alive after this, with this new email address that is written below. Still waiting for that answer. I finished the letter, put it on their desk, put a copy in my backpack, and I went to get my equipment. It was time for our group to go out and search for missiles and launchers. After finishing that letter and immediately leaving for a mission, in my mind, I paraphrased King Solomon, who wrote, "There's a time for words, and there's a time for action." Part 5, smelling the end. Every day we found more missiles and more launchers and destroyed them. We had joked that we could make a great war CD soundtrack. Behind the silence of human voices and the ridiculously loud booms of explosions and weapons were the telltale sounds of life and death. The worst sound of all, of course, which we knew all too well, was the pop, whistle, and whoosh of an anti-tank missile being shot in our direction. Then there was the high-pitched ting of the terrorist small arms fire from the Russian-made Kalashnikov machine guns. And on the Israeli side, there was that ubiquitous sound of the unmanned drones sailing the skies above us night and day. The sound of a tank firing, artillery fire, fighter jets, the lower pitched sound of M16 machine guns, this was the background music of our lives. At some point, it was like music, and you get used to it. 2 officers at the front of our unit suddenly found something and were reporting it on the radio. Word was passed back down the line. Below us, on the roof of a house in the valley, they spotted a huge banner with Sheikh Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, on it. We had learned from Rabbi Taratin that this was always a bad sign. On the top of the roof of this house, they'd spotted 2 missile launchers. They reported it, and it was decided the Air Force would destroy it from above. And within minutes this time, we could hear a jet in the sky above us, but couldn't see it because of the clouds. We were told to dig in and prepare for a very big boom. So we hid behind boulders. A strange sounding whiz could be heard. Out of the clouds emerged a small missile, about the size of a rifle, and moved incredibly slow. And again, we could see the colors on the sides, and it hit one target with amazingly perfect precision. Boom! Rocks went flying. The officers reported the accuracy of the first hit, and within a minute, another missile came out of the clouds and made the second hit also precise with a gigantic boom. I could barely make out the jet way above us in the clouds, and after releasing the second missile, he pulled up and started flying away. The officers told me afterwards that as he released the second missile, he screamed over the radio, which could only be heard in the commander's earpiece, and said, "Give me targets, damn it! Give me more targets!" I wondered what is going on in that man's mind. What kind of energy is bouncing around the body and soul of a pilot vis-a-vis a simple infantryman? Of course, I prefer to be on the ground. Not that I could ever be a pilot. But that was for a number of reasons. As opposed to an airman or an artillery soldier, I want to see everything with my own eyes and not through a screen or a report. If I'm going to use a weapon of destruction, I want to be right there to know just exactly where that bullet is going. Now, of course, a singular bullet is not going to have much influence in the big picture. But it seemed to me that opposed to a missile or a shell, a tiny singular bullet can have an inverse relationship with the effect it has on one's soul. That is the great advantage and great disadvantage of having your boots on the ground. We did our best, made our reports, searched for more missiles and terrorists, found other interesting things, and towards sunset, came back to our home. As we walked into the house, I could smell something strange. And then I realized this is cooked rice. And then I realized it's Friday night. Shabbat had come and I had no idea. We didn't have much to eat, but we had enough. Somebody had a plastic bottle with grape juice in it. How did you manage to get grape juice? I asked them. Well, while you guys were gone during an artillery barrage, we ran out to the garden and quickly picked some ripe grapes and brought them inside, and we simply squeezed them and made grape juice. The entire unit, except for the guards, then squeezed into a tiny room which served as dining room, not quite an appropriate term, which was barely lit with the tiniest light. Our battalion doctor, Dr. Moshe, a brain surgeon in civilian life, volunteered at age 51 and was with us the entire time. That's him. Since he served as tribal elder, he made kiddush. He poured the grape juice into a makeshift kiddush cup and made sure to let the grape juice pour a little over the sides of the cup. This is an ancient Jewish sign of plenty, a sign of thanks that we lack nothing. Here we were, I thought, in the middle of nowhere. It's Shabbat, we really should be with our families, and we're stuck in this hell, lacking everything, and yet we're making a statement with a lot of chutzpah. We lack nothing. It was beautiful. But then the tiny light that was left in the stick light went out, and we had to eat in total darkness. There was no way to see anything, not people, not food, not the door, not the hallway, and yet nobody pushed, nobody complained, nobody lacked anything. We didn't even have plates. We used old pieces of army bread for plates, and on them we had a little spoonful of rice, a piece of bamba, and then we ate the plates themselves. And we washed it down with water. And yet I can honestly say this was one of the most delicious and moving meals I've ever eaten. I think we were truly thankful for every morsel we had. Hey, it was Shabbat. The first day we were in Lebanon, back in Sunday, somebody pulled out a cake and Chezi said, hey, let's save it for Shabbat. And we'd all roared with laughter because we were supposed to be inside for just 2 or 3 days. And there was simply no way we could ever last until Shabbat. It wasn't even a possibility. And yet here we were. Nobody joked about that cake on Shabbat. That simply wasn't funny anymore. On Shabbat, there was more hunting. And when one of our groups was on its way back to the house, Sohari tripped over some barbed wire and slit his arm open with a big gash. The doctor sewed him up on the spot. How great it was to have a doctor in our own unit. This was such a luxury. It was a wonderful psychological safety net. This is Sohari there sleeping. His hand and his arm were all bandaged up, and it apparently hurt him a lot. It was quite obvious that he was going to go home. But this man walked into the house, put his rifle and his equipment down, and came straight into the kitchen and asked how he could help. I was amazed. In short, Sohari refused to go back to Israel. He was going to stay until the very end. He only had one hand, and he helped more with his one hand than many did with two. Again, the little acts of selfless chesed like this, they, in my eyes, were the true sign of bravery, of true giving. We then got word of a piece of terrible intelligence. A message had just been intercepted from terrorist cell phones. Hezbollah soldiers still holding out near Taiba were to take notice of a yellow house at the edge of the village of Taiba with a garbage dump outside and hit it with missiles since there were soldiers inside. This was the worst possible news we could hear about our home because it was painted yellow. We were on the edge of town and we had a garbage dump right behind the house. I understood that because of this news, we'd have to move. But of course, nobody wanted to move. We were comfortable with our home. But then Roni, the commander, said that despite the warning, we wouldn't be moving. I couldn't stay quiet. I said, Roni, am I missing something? It's obvious that they've discovered us and that we're just sitting ducks right now. Let's take our fate in our own hands and get out of here. But he answered, I hear you, but I'm not so sure they're referring to our house. I think it's best that we stay. I thought at the time he was making a big mistake, but I said my piece, and it was his call. It turns out in retrospect that he was absolutely right. On the aerial photo and in his own questions to the intelligence folks, he knew and saw what I couldn't. The entire part of the village where we were was full of yellow houses, and every single house had a garbage dump right next to it. He did make one change though. Nobody could sleep on the western side of the house, the side facing out from the village. That side had a lot of soldiers, but where would they go now? The entire house was full. Every single room was full of soldiers. That night, a group of Western soldiers came into our room, the eastern part of the house, which doubled as kitchen. You're welcome to sleep here, guys. Really, you are. But there simply isn't any room here, said one soldier from our room. The other guys asked, how exactly are you guys sleeping here? And he was answered, we sleep on our backs. The Vagabond soldiers then answered, then sleep on your sides and we'll be able to fit all of us inside. That was a great joke and we all laughed. They didn't, they were totally serious. And we realized we were kind of egotistical there. We should have suggested that ourselves, but we didn't. And so, of course, we all stretched out on the floor, turned on our sides, and fit the older soldiers in like sardines. Now, I could barely breathe. It was really tight. I wasn't sure I could last like this. And then something very strange happened. The soldier behind me nibbled my ear from behind. I'm not kidding. He nibbled my ear. I giggled, realized what was happening, and tickled the guy in front of me in the ribs. He giggled and caressed the neck of the guy in front of him. And so on and so forth, all 20 soldiers, all lined up against the wall. I had never laughed so hard silently before. In fact, we all laughed. We were all in hysterics in total silence. And that was one of those moments. After we all calmed down, something strange happened. We all fell asleep. And that's how we slept until the very last night. It's those small things that can get you, sometimes more than the big things. Personal space, a blister on your toe, nausea, migraine, and how you sleep. We were learning the elastic limits of human flexibility. When you think you can't take it anymore, leave your comfort zone even more, and you can still thrive. Sleeping posture was just a simile. It was true about life itself. Sometimes you just have to declare, I'm a leaf flowing down a river, and nothing can faze me. The next morning was foggy. Smoking was forbidden, of course, but apparently the fog gave some of the heavy smokers a very strange idea. They went to the kitchen, took a tea bag, dissected it, emptied the contents into some rolling paper they had smuggled into Lebanon, and went into the cellar to smoke their tea cigarettes. Any smoke escaping the house would not be seen thanks to the fog. Some soldiers thought they had gone bonkers, and they told them so. I saw the look of joy on their faces and thought it was somewhat cute, although potentially dangerous. And then a huge convoy arrived, bigger and better than the last. Energy bars, beef sticks, candy, cakes, cigarettes, wet wipes, new underwear, and since our supply officer was the manager of a pharmacy, hilariously irrelevant items such as mouthwash, mint-flavored dental floss, and toothpaste. Now for a quick personal story, my grandparents and mother came to the USA from Germany, and they got out at the last moment. When they passed away, I wanted, as a young man, to keep the Holocaust alive in my mind. And one of the ways I tried to remember was not to buy anything that was made in Germany. This wasn't done out of hate, but just a way to remember. And in this convoy, there were energy bars with a label, made in Germany. It turns out that our supply sergeant on the Israel side, frustrated at the logistical problems of the IDF, which afterwards brought about a huge commission of inquiry and a paradigm change in the IDF itself, went straight to the German company located in Israel that imported these energy bars. And he asked for any spare supplies of bars that they might be able to donate. The man had told them he just donated a few hours ago a whole shipment of bars to another IDF unit, but he took personal initiative and a very big risk professionally and gave him a huge industrial load of bars just for us. When I heard this, I held this energy bar, known as Corny, in my hand. I lifted it towards the sky and made a toast to these wonderful German folks and announced, and so ends my refusal to use or buy German-made products. If I want to remember the Holocaust, there are better ways to do it than to boycott an entire country, which I don't believe in doing anyway. Also, I was hungry. A bottle of Aquafresh mouthwash made it into our room. I took a swig and I gurgled, and wow, that was an experience. We pulled out some wet wipes that had arrived. No matter where we wiped them on ourselves, they turned black after a few wipes. We'd been here over a week. We were sweating, and we hadn't changed a stitch of clothing. Some men took a huge risk and changed underwear with the new pairs that had arrived. Most said, no way. My underwear now fits my body so well that if I put on new underwear, I'll get chafed. And chafing is the true horror of every infantry soldier. And I won't go into more detail about that subject. In short, we were acting like little boys and enjoying every moment. And just when the atmosphere was light and the convoy made us think that the war was over, yes, as you can imagine, missiles again were fired at the houses nearby. Terrorists were still in the area. Some whizzed right by our home. This time we all cursed twice as much. Shouldn't we have understood by now? But we didn't. That this isn't all behind us. But opposed to before, there was a difference. Special ground forces with anti-missile missiles had been waiting for them. As soon as they fired and their positions had been compromised, we could hear a different kind of missile going in the opposite direction. This happened all night and apparently was so incredibly accurate that virtually all Hezbollah missiles being shot towards Israel ended. And it was about time. Part 6, climbing down a different Everest. A few days later, a ceasefire went into effect. We would be returning to Israel soon, but nobody knew exactly when. We were still out searching for missiles, and this time, since both sides were honoring the ceasefire, surprisingly, we returned by way of the house of another platoon in our company. It was here that I met up again with my artist friend Daniel, and he showed me his masterpiece, a life-size drawing of Sheikh Nasrallah on the wall in charcoal, literally charcoal. Under it was written in English, "All you need is love." Daniel put it out there pure and simple, and I agreed with him. That's what was missing. And in general, I think that there really are two basic ways to be a soldier. One is to go to war out of hate, try to kill as many as the enemy as you can. And the other is to go to war out of love for your fellow civilians who are getting murdered, out of love for humans in general. I believe that this singular idea is the most important principle that binds us together in the IDF and makes it so unique. We returned to our home, and the entire house was buzzing. We would be leaving in an hour. That last hour seemed to go by as long as the entire time we were in Lebanon. People, including myself, became very itchy and edgy. Let's get out of here already. The suspense was nerve-wracking. And then, clearly and crisply over the radio, which had been turned up so everybody could hear it, we all heard the company commander say two of the happiest words I've ever heard. Two words which sent a shiver into our bones and a cheer from our throats. We didn't whisper anymore. And the words were, "Tziyud aleinu," or in English, to paraphrase, "Men, let's get our equipment on." We all rose with our equipment, all of it. Once again, we were schlepping. As we stood up, waiting for the green light to actually leave our house and fall in with the rest of the battalion out in the street, I thought about those words, "Tziyud aleinu." Let's get our equipment on. That company commander, a great man, one of us, a humble and sharp-witted chap, was schlepping too. He didn't say, "You schlep." He said, "Let's schlep." There is no caste system in the IDF. You schlep, I schlep, we all schlep. Kind of like Livnot when Aaron was out there in the alleyways of Tzfat, picking up stones with his bare hands, just like Chevra, and building a wall. Teach by example rather than just words. Do as I do, not just do as I say. And then he said, "Green light." The first man joyously opened the door, and we all danced out of the house. The night air was delicious. We were in incredibly high spirits. As I left the building, I looked back at the house, pockmarked with the 13, and I thought two thoughts. One, what would go through the minds of the rightful owners when they returned to their house? Would they curse us? Or would they understand the big picture and curse Hezbollah? Or maybe they'd curse us all. I saw the windows that were cracked, and even in the dark, I could see for the first time that all the windows here were reinforced with chicken wire. These people live with the realization that war is going to happen right outside their windows. How pathetic. I felt so sorry for an existence. The second thought was much simpler. Thank you, house, for protecting us. Thank you, Hashem, for giving us this house to protect us. I actually put my hand on the doorpost as I left, and kissed it just like a mezuzah. As we went out to the streets, we met other soldiers we hadn't seen in a while. It was great energy bouncing around. It would take us 3 or 4 hours of hiking the mountains of southern Lebanon in order to get back to Israel, but in our minds, this was like walking across the street. We were going home. Moshe, the company commander's radio man, fell and groaned because right then, as he left the house, he seriously twisted his entire leg and he couldn't walk. Another man, out of joy, fell over a pile of rocks after 10 days of not falling and started limping. The two of them were told, perhaps you should go in one of the convoys, but they refused to get into any armored vehicle that would take them back to Israel. No way, they said, in the true spirit of infantrymen who suspiciously eye any armored vehicles and see them as weird-shaped metal boxes that just draw enemy fire. Those two men limped the whole way back to Israel. This last hike home was a journey of true yearning. To get to Eretz Yisrael. Long before we reached Israel, we wondered if the border was just around the corner, just around the next hill, just over the next ridge. It wasn't unlike the Exodus from Egypt, but it didn't take 40 years. We had everything on our backs, and we just wanted to leave this peace desert and get to the promised land. That was meaningful. And then there it was. There was the border. People were cheering and singing and skipping and walking and hugging for the last few hundred meters. That's the hole in the fence. The very same hole we came to 10 days before, and now it was much bigger. We crossed the border and didn't know what to do or where to go. We just hugged each other. Hundreds of men, the men of our battalion, all alive and well, just hugging and crying, laughing, backslapping, offering prayers of thanksgiving, some alone, some together. Sometimes prayers can be so simple and perfect. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, for keeping us alive, for helping us survive, and letting us reach this moment. It's called the Shechianu, and you all know it. So simple and so deep. We were happy to be alive, but we were not joyous. After all, we had lost 13 men in our battalion, many good friends. Now, just to set things straight before I finish, I want to say, none of us, to my knowledge, regretted going to this war. None of us, to my knowledge, thought that Israel was at fault in this war. We all, to my knowledge, blamed Hezbollah for what they did directly or indirectly to Israeli citizens, Israeli soldiers, and even Lebanese citizens. But still, it is pathetic in a bird's eye view. Grown men shooting at each other, playing war games, dealing in life and death. As humanity, we can do better than this, can't we? For the first time, we could take off our backpacks and our flak jackets without worry. I remember when we put them on and snuck into Lebanon 10 days, or was it months before? They were so ridiculously heavy. And I just finished a book that someone sent me before the war, John Krakauer's Into Thin Air. I felt, and perhaps even looked, like a Sherpa. I thought of this book as I took off that backpack now. We were indeed Sherpas, but we had climbed a different Everest. Within an hour, we were going through Tiberias, close to our base. Tiberias! I remember then. It all started here. Back then, I had arrived at my emergency pickup station in Tiberias, the same lakeside town, and while I was walking to my ride to the base, a barrage of rockets fell nearby, and I took cover with an elderly grandmother behind the building, and she had said to me, "You go get them. We cannot let this happen again. You go get them." I remember her exact words. I remember her face. And now I thought, wait a second. Why did she say again? We cannot let this happen again. What did she mean when she said again? She must have been a Holocaust survivor. How could I not have realized that when she said it? I could have comforted her. I could have said some words that would bring her some solace. But on the other hand, I was pleased at least for one thing. Even though we were tiny cogs in a big machine, we had a mission and we completed it. We went and we got them. We stopped the shooting. There was comfort in that. I wish I could find her and tell her this. It might have brought her comfort too. Happy is the one whose compass is a Jewish grandmother. And I want to finish with the 10 things I learned this summer in Lebanon that I wrote in 2006. because this is what I felt when I wrote this. Number one, human life is sacred. Number two, the people of Israel are amazing, eternal, and caper bushy. Number three, sometimes it takes a traumatic experience to get to appreciate things. Only afterwards do we realize how often people get upset at the most trivial and insignificant things. 4, laugh at yourself, it's healthy. Laugh with others, it binds. Number 5, war is kind of stupid. Every soldier should remember this. Letting terrorists kill innocent people without reacting is even stupider. Civilians should remember this. Number 6, if you're ever in doubt if you should hug a person or not, hug them. Better to err in senseless love than in senseless hate. Friendship and camaraderie are much stronger than hate and terrorism. Number 7, King David's poetry has immense depth and relevance. Prayer can be so helpful, but sometimes serving someone else a cup of coffee is tantamount to praying. As Rav Yisrael Salanter once said, most people care about their own physical well-being and about other people's spiritual well-being. We should care about our own spiritual well-being and worry about other people's physical well-being. This is not just a saying. It's a way of life. And I learned it there. Number 8, people are usually much more amazing than you think they are. Number 9, coffee is much more than just coffee. Under Armour is much more than just underwear. Number 10, want to fix the world? For the first step, all you need is love. And just a few more words that have to do with today. As I said last week before sharing, back in 2006, when I returned home after 2 weeks of being away, I felt a little weird, a little strange, a little wonky. And the Army psychologist helped a lot, and we spent 2 days with them after we returned. But I felt I needed a little more, and Sarit and I decided I'd go get professional help. And the woman who helped me heard my request, asked some questions, and said, my suggestion to you is to simply sit down and write all of your experiences out on paper. And that's just what I did. 40 pages, right then and there. And afterwards, I was cured, mamash. I felt like I was back at being my normal self. 14 years later, for these 2 sessions, I whittled it down to about a third and tried to focus mainly on the events and feelings that had to do with Jewish values and with generic human values too. After all, that's what we do at Livnot. Alongside focusing our lives around values, I think there's another takeaway from this story that is very relevant to what is happening now throughout the world. We're in a war. We can't see the enemy. The disadvantaged and the elderly are at risk. But it could hit any of us at any time, and nobody is totally safe. What was obvious beforehand is not obvious now, and what was rare has become commonplace. For many of us, life has taken U-turns and even some 360s. We need to focus on not letting the enemy hurt us. We need to focus on others. We need a sense of humor. We need to do sometimes big, but more often little tiny acts of chesed that will, when this is all over, make our world a better place. We need to learn from this war and be transformed from it. Tikkun Olam starts with Tikkun Atzmi. Fixing the world starts with fixing oneself. And that is one of the great Jewish traditions that we can take from this story and what's happening now. To take some sour chickpeas and make the sweetest hummus that we can.